This is Lenny B from avstudiopro.com, broadcast tools for the home studio producer. Now, this is a short video to show you how to use our pack of free music beds and effects in your podcast, YouTube video, or any multimedia production. Now, to get the 10 free audio imaging tools, simply sign up for the avstudiopro.com newsletter, and I want to share with you some tips on how I personally prepare volume settings, compression, EQ, and audio placement of the audio files to get impact without losing clarity of the message. Now, I'm working in Logic, Apple Logic Pro, and but really this is the same. The principles are the same here in any DAW that you're working with. The first thing I have is my voiceover track. So this is my voice for the promo. It's unprocessed, so I first like to start with a little bit of compression just to level this out and make sure that it's consistent and sounds good. I like to use a EQ first in the chain and then go to a compressor because it's compressing the EQ'd audio. And again, I'll usually go to a preset to start with. Simply sign up for the avstudiopro.com newsletter to immediately download the 10 free audio imaging tools. The pack includes instant replay, a transitional identifier with fast forwarding or rewinding tape sound effects, and dirty drum beats. Hip and urban, this is perfect for radio imaging, podcasts, or any broadcast imaging production. Any of the audio that I compress with the sound effects and everything kind of hover around -8 to -6 in my output. So then when I master it, I have a little bit of headroom left. Now I'll import my audio. These are the actual music beds and effects included. There's 10 of them here in the free audio imaging sound pack volume 1. And since this promo is actually promoting the sound effects themselves, I'll probably pick one of them to use as a filler in between because I want to highlight each one of them and describe them in my voiceover here. I'll be describing each one, but then show a little bit of an example and punch the volume initially, and then have me talk over a reduced volume underneath as I just describe each one. But I'll probably pick just one of them for a music bed, just so it doesn't completely drop out, so we have something underneath at all times. So what I'm going to do, these are actually in the order that I described them, so I'll go ahead and place them and size them now underneath each of the descriptions. What I want to do for each of these, when I do place them, I want to try to make sure I place them right after the last word I say so you can really hear them, and I want to keep these edits really tight, but I don't want to cut off any of my consonants. I want there to be clarity in exactly what I'm saying. It's really important to make sure you get your message across. Let's listen. Chord sustain. So just a little bit more. I want to make sure you get the whole word of sustain in there. Chord sustain. Now, each of the actual effects that are beds that are a little bit longer, I'm going to want to make sure that they fade out, and this is a little crossfade, so it's fading out, and it's probably about half by the time I get my last, that's a consonant, what am I saying there? Groove and drum loop, that's the P. I want to make sure that's pretty clear, and then right after that I'll start my next sound. So you can see that the volume on this crossfade is pretty low by the time I get this in there. I may want to touch that up a little bit. The bottom line is to make sure that your message is clear. You want to make sure that the listener is able to hear every single word and there's no like, what did he say? You know, it's really important because that's the point of this entire thing. You want to make sure your message gets across. And what I'll probably do here is duplicate this track because there's going to be a little overlap. So actually, on this particular one, I'm leading it. This looks like a ramp up, I can see, and the first stronger hit is here. So I'm going to actually start dipping or ducking this audio a little sooner. So it crossfades. See how it sounds. And it morphs into a bass groove and drum loop. Drum loop. And drum loop. A bass groove and drum loop. Again, at the end of this, this is my last phrase on my voiceover. This starts ducking, but it's definitely out of the way. I want this to kind of, this next element, I want it to overtake this one, and also make sure that I think that's an S. So S is, since it's in a different frequency spectrum, will cut through, it seems like, so I can overlap those a little bit. See what it sounds like. And bustling roadways. Yeah, it definitely takes it over. It's tight. I can hear everything clear. Each element, I can hear the former bed. I can hear my voiceover pretty clear, and I definitely allow this to take over the attention of the promo, which is the next element. I want to draw your attention to the next thing, so I want it to be loud and kind of overcome these two when it does hit. And bustling roadways. Now in this particular transition, I've got this pretty aggressive, you can see the loops, and it's a pretty aggressive kind of music bed. I want to make sure I get that last consonant. I could see it. It's here. I think it's bed. It's a D. A looping bed. I want to make sure that D is clear enough, so I'm going to place the new bed that I want to overtake this old bed and draw the attention of the promo and the listeners. I'm going to make sure that's behind the D, and it is. And also you can see this crossfade. This is a volume envelope. I'm making sure that this gets out of the way enough to where we're able to hear this clearly, and it gets out of the way of the new one. I want to overtake it. Let's listen to how this transition sounds. That morphs into a looping bed. It's good. It's really tight, and I can definitely hear the transition. I want your attention to be drawn to this new element that overtakes the promo, and that definitely is what's happening in this transition here now. Now that all the audio files from the 10 free audio imaging tools are in place, and they're actually in the right place in the session here, I have decided that I want to use some of the tools a few times because I want to fill in, especially in the beginning and the end. And what I've decided is I'm going to use the boarding the Starship audio. I'm going to use that in the beginning, and then I'm going to use the on blast bumper at the end, and I can loop those and expand those a little bit to cover the close and to cover the open. Now the reason why I'm pulling one from the end and putting it in front is because I want it to be fresh. I don't want like boarding the Starship and then boarding the Starship again. I don't want these files to be too repetitious. But if I pull this from the back and put it in the beginning, and pull this one from kind of the front, middle, and put it at the end, the repetition won't be as noticeable. And I know that's a small kind of a thing, but I'm always looking for ways to keep it fresh, keep it exciting, and I think that's kind of the mark, looking at those, it's kind of the mark of maybe an experienced or more polished producer, is to try to keep things fresh. Every little thing that you can do, you go over and go over and go over your production and try to fine-tune it and optimize it so it really sparkles and shines and is really a nice piece of work. So I'm going to go ahead and change these lengths of the beginning and place them now, and then we'll go through and set some levels. In this particular transition, this is my introduction, and then I'm going to go into this list of the audio files that are included in the 10 free audio imaging tools package. I'm going to duck this audio a little bit sooner, so it's basically saying, okay, here comes something new. I know that I know that's kind of a little picky, and it's such a minute little thing, but to me, by dropping out the audio, you're also a little early. You're also saying, hey, something's coming up, check this out, and let's listen to how it sounds. Audio imaging tools. The pack includes instant replay. So basically, this little transition is a little looser, but it's on purpose because I want to now spotlight this list that's coming up. And then what I've done at the end of this production, this is just for this particular session and the purpose of this video, I'm going to let this music bed run at the end because I know I'm going to put a few links or keep my contact information at the end of the screen here. So I'm going to let this run and then also slowly fade out, an extended fade here. Let's hear how that sounds. I may even make that a little longer, and I'll always have the option of cutting it shorter later on. Now what I'd like to do is I'm going to go through and adjust the volumes in both tracks 2 and 3 here of the music beds and sound effects that are underneath my voiceover here on top. And what I'm going to do is there's certain points where I want the music and the sound effects to be spotlighted in this promo. I want them to stand out and really take over the promo. But then when my voice comes back in, I want to make sure that my message is clear. There's diction in my voice. You can hear every vowel and consonant clearly because it's all about the message. I want to make sure that people can understand. So I'm going to duck these each and listen to them in reference to underneath the voiceover and make sure that they're low enough. And I'll probably go back and adjust them a little bit after I do my mastering, which is once we're all done. You may not be too familiar with this process. Once we're all done, we're going to compress the entire tracks, all of the tracks together. We're going to compress them and also EQ them. And after you put compression, it really adjusts the volume a little bit. And I'll explain this in a little bit more detail further. But once you do that, it does change the final outcome. And again, using clarity and clarity of the message and clarity of my diction and my voiceover as a lead, I'll be adjusting accordingly. So first we'll go through and adjust the volumes initially, but knowing that I'm going to do it again. So for the introduction, one of the things I want to do right away is make sure the sound grabs somebody's attention. And these audio files and logos and music beds, they're designed, and I wrote them as audio elements to begin with. So there's an initial sounder that is supposed to grab your attention. There's a bell sound in the beginning here that is kind of an alert, and that's what these things are designed to do. It's hey, listen to me, and then a bed underneath it. So I want to make sure that's good and loud. So I'm going to go and start adjusting my audio levels for each of these. And this is an automated process that you can do. And most of the DAWs, digital audio workstations, will do this. I'm going to set nodes and then adjust the volumes, and you'll see it visually here. AV Studio Pro. AVStudioPro.com introduces a new free pack of music beds and effects to use in your podcast, YouTube video, or any. What I've done is I've kept this level pretty consistent. I'll be looking at the meters to make sure they stick around -8 and -12, somewhere in there. That's a good start. And I'll be optimizing and fine-tuning this later on, but you'll see that I've ducked this down, what's about 6 decibels, so that's the difference between hearing the voiceover clear and then having the music too loud. I want to make sure that my voice is definitely clear, so I'll keep listening back. That's one thing I've always said. By the time you are done producing any piece of audio or video, you've probably listened to it hundreds of times, over and over. You're listening and checking volumes of things. I've always said I'd give anything to hear one of my promos for the very first time. And as a producer, you're kind of ruined. You can't hear what that initial impression is when somebody listens to it for the first time. You try to put yourself in their shoes, and hear what you've done. But it's really hard because you're so close to your project by the time you're finished by listening to it over and over again. But you do the best you can. Now what I'm doing here is I'm keeping this volume pretty consistent, and then again I'm ducking it a little bit here underneath. Now every audio file is going to be different. When you see the volumes kind of go up, you may need to duck things a little bit more at certain times, and you just kind of do it accordingly. But what I'm also doing is making sure I put it back up to where it was, so then I have a fresh start when I hit my next audio loop. In this particular transition, I'm making sure that I keep this a little louder. You can see the volume is low, and it's also just high frequencies that begin here, so it won't cut into my voiceover too much. But you could also see that I punch it up because, again, they're just high frequencies, and also they're lower. So, and I also want to spotlight this. So you can see that I'm punching up the volume here, dropping it down just a little bit because I still want the impact of that first bass drum hit, and then dropping it down again. And I'll probably adjust this a little bit more once the music bed starts, so you can hear this next voiceover clearly. And what I listen for is, when I'm referencing my voiceover verses or on top of the music bed, the thing I'm listening for, I'm focusing my attention on the voice, and I want to make sure that it's clear. Again, there's not any compression on this whole piece yet, and that's going to change everything. But I want to make sure that, first and foremost, what I'm saying is clear, and I'll punch up or bring up the audio just enough to where I can still hear the clarity of what I'm saying, and then I'll back it off a little bit. And actually the compression at the end and EQing really kind of glues everything together, and it fills in, the compressor will fill in the spaces in between my voice to where, when I take a breath, it'll punch the music up in between it and sound really full and get that wall of sound that everybody wants at a highest volume possible without distorting. And that's really powerful when you're looking to create impact in a promotion or a podcast or imaging for broadcast radio. Magistrate's Interstate is a snappy and building music bed with drum machines, rising synthesizers, and orchestra hits, evoking momentum, hustling crowds, and bustling roadways. I do want to mention one other thing. This particular music bed, the Magistrate's Interstate, has a lot of high frequency in it. There's bells and tambourines and hi-hats and things. And I feel personally that it may live in the same frequency space as a lot of my consonants and diction. And to me, I hear it's competing a little bit. So I may EQ this particular one a little bit, maybe drop some of the highs in this part. I'll see what it sounds like after I compress the whole project, but it's competing a little bit in the same frequency space, which is preventing me from raising this volume, because it makes it so the voiceover is unclear. So I may drop some of the highs in this later on. All right, I've gone through and set all of my volumes, and I've left enough headroom. Nothing gets louder than about -6, 5.8 decibels. So that leaves me a lot of room when I'm compressing. And you'll see what that means and how important it is later on when you compress the entire project. Audio compression and equalization, it's kind of something that I believe separates the amateurs from the professionals, and it's something that can take a really long time to not only understand, but then to optimize and kind of hone your skill at. So it may be above kind of some of the home studio producer level of understanding, but I want you to see kind of what I'm doing and how I use it, and slowly maybe it's something you can begin incorporating. But it's definitely important to getting your message across, because a lot of the softer audio elements in your production need to be heard, and a lot of the loud elements in your audio production, whether it be your words or music or sound effects or whatever, a lot of them are loud and they need to be pushed down. So what compression does is it really evens things out. So no matter what level it is, it's consistent. Now it does take away dynamics, which is a very important part of keeping people's ears entertained and preventing kind of hearing fatigue. The dynamics is also very important. So when they say effect, it's something you can barely hear. It's not something that is used over the top. You can use compression that way in certain instances, but it's something you use lightly to really make sure that your production, the message comes through. And I'll explain further. I'll probably do some more in-depth compression and equalization tutorials or tips and tricks for avstudiopro.com in the coming weeks. But I wanted to give you just a little taste of how I produced this video, and maybe kind of help you in your own productions. All right, I've got all my sound effects and music beds in place. I've gone through and set the levels, and this is kind of the final stage, is where I actually will go through and compress and EQ it a little bit and kind of finalize it before I imported it into my video software. So I'm actually finalizing the final music bed here, and I want to show you what I do. What we're going to do is called mastering, and again, this kind of separates the novices from the professionals. And there's definitely several different ways you can do it. This is the way I do it. This is the way I've done it in broadcast radio for several years. So what I'm going to do is use a compressor limiter in my chain, and also first I'll have an equalizer on top of that, and I'm going to go through and just get this audio optimized. And really what I'm doing here, the reason why I'm doing this is to get it as loud as possible without losing dynamics and kind of gluing the whole mix together. And if you do it the right way, you can continue to keep your dynamics but give it a little punchy kind of feel, and it really has a broadcast kind of sound. So I'm going to put my EQ, and we'll do an EQ first. stereo EQ, and then I'll set that afterwards, so shut it off, and I like to first set my compressor. Many different digital audio workstations have some type of compressor in it, so the philosophy is important here, not as much the settings or the precise settings. I'm going to try to explain the reasons behind what I'm doing. So what we'll do is let's start by listening a little bit, and what I'm going to do is try to compress this to make it, I like to live around 6 decibels or -6. What I'm doing here is taming the transients, which is the loud hits, the loud points, the drum hits, the consonants, and we're bringing them so they're more consistent with the softer parts, keyboard pads or vowels in my voice. And let's see if we can set this. AVStudioPro.com introduces a new free pack of music beds and effects to use in your podcast, YouTube video, or any multimedia production. I know that I'm going eventually to upload this to YouTube, and when you do data compression, this is a tip that I've learned from Bobby Ozinski, when you change the file from a lossless or like a wave into an MP3 or a non-compressed data file into like YouTube, there's some digital artifacts that could come up in that process. It's part of the data compression, and there's nothing you can do about it except you could make sure that you don't hit 0. What you do is you make sure going in, I think -0.7 is the hottest, and anything over that will actually distort. So I usually go down to -1 decibel. So nothing coming out of here is going to be higher than -1. Simply sign up for the AVStudioPro.com newsletter to immediately download the 10 free audio imaging tools. I think that sounds pretty good. It sounds a little bit thicker, a little more volume to it. The pack includes instant replay. You can see the limiter is working just a little bit. Maybe we could back up off that. And now I'm going to go over to my EQ, turn it on, and let's take a listen, and I'll use the analyzer and the meters to really see what we're working with here. A transitional. I like to cut a lot of the low frequencies. This will also help the entire mix become louder. These are sub frequencies that you rarely hear unless you have a huge sound system. And on the other end of the spectrum, the real highs, I just make sure they're scooped out so they don't compete with some of the other frequencies. Additional identifier with fast forwarding or rewinding tape sound effects. I like to dip the middle just a little bit, a tiny bit, to give it a little shape. I'm really keeping things minimal. They're just affecting the color of the sound just a little bit. I'm not doing major equalization here. And dirty drum beats. Hip and urban, this is perfect for radio imaging, podcasts, or any broadcast imaging production. So this is without the equalization. Sub-bass drop is an audio element with deep bass. And now let's hear the same thing with the equalization. Sub-bass drop is an audio element with deep bass, a percussive loop. I think that the listener and most people have absolutely no idea about any of this stuff behind the scenes that's happening, but it's subliminal. It's kind of like perception. Somebody may say, it sounds better. I don't know why. I can just hear things better. That's good. That means that what you're doing is transparent. It has an effect, but people don't know it. Again, you're just nudging things a little bit one way or the other. It sounds a little bit more beefy. It's got some bottom end to it, some clarity here. We've cut the extreme low and extreme high frequencies because they're just not necessary in this type of production. And we're dipping the mids just a little bit so it doesn't sound so nasally and maybe muddy. Or you know, a lot of times there's a lot of frequencies and a lot of the timbre of the instruments in your voice, they kind of build up here, so we pop this down just a little bit. So the end result is something clear and crisp and punchy and thick that really translates the message, and that's really what you want to do. Passive loop and a synth chord sustain. So let's just look and see again what we've done. Let's take everything off. Sustain. I was living around the -6, -12, as you can see on the master meter here. That's where the output was. It wasn't cranked up to the top. I'm using the compressor, EQ first and then the compressor to bring it up the rest of the way, and it never goes over -1 decibels, but it's punched up as much as possible. It compresses the dynamics so you're getting as much as possible without losing too much dynamics, because you want to keep things fresh. If you push it all the way to the top constantly, it sounds overcompressed and thin, and there's no dynamics in it. And let's hear the difference. The On Blast bumper is an attention-grabbing, funky, and so that's without. Now let's do it with it. Funky and exciting, provocative broadcasting bumper, beginning with an epic drone that morphs into a bass groove and drum loop. We're just licking the top end here. Every once in a while it may hit -1, but very rarely. And so we're about as high as we can get without going overboard. And I think that is pretty good. It gives your piece a nice punch, a good volume that people can hear on any kind of device. You know, some people are listening on tiny little computer speakers. Some people are listening on huge sound systems. So you have to keep all that in mind. So we'll bounce this down, import it into the project. And I hope that kind of helped you get an idea of how to place some of these audio tools, some music beds and sound effects. If you haven't yet, you can download the 10 free audio imaging music beds and sound effects at avstudiopro.com. You simply just sign up for our newsletter, which keeps you connected with our latest free downloads, blog posts, tips and tricks. We've got reviews, and keeps you connected with our latest music beds and sound effect releases. Don't forget to visit the Stock Audio store, where we have all different kinds of music beds and effects for podcasters and radio broadcasters, video producers, and all types of content creators. I'm Lenny B from avstudiopro.com. Thanks for watching.